Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session on data visualization. We are lucky to have Anand Srinivasan with us today, joining in from Bangalore. Anand is an IITM alumnus, BTech 1995. Is that correct, Anand? 1995?
Yes, 1995.
Yes. And he has been very amazing data scientist throughout his 26, 27-year-old career. Has worked with multiple industries, airline industry, Sabre Technologies, Dell. He was with the senior management at GoAir, and now he is about to start a new venture, a new airline, which is going to be launched very soon. I can say that formally, right, Anand?
Yes, you can say that formally, Rahul.
Perfect. So very glad. Anand not recently actually, Anand was listed as the top 10 data scientist in India. So very lucky to have you, Anand, joining us today for the session.
My pleasure, Rahul. It's always good to touch base with you, and happy to help in any way I can.
All right. So today's session is going to be on how do you see data? That's going to be the primary purpose. How do you represent data? And most of the ideas are essentially Anand's idea that we are going to discuss, and therefore we have Anand in the session today. So let us start. First of all, Anand, why do you think we need to emphasize on visualization of data?
So, there's a cliche, right? I mean, a picture being worth 1,000 words. I mean, fundamentally, that still holds true, right? End of the day, when you look at analytics as a whole, the fundamental purpose is, people talk about data science, etc. The only reason that field exists is to help businesses make better decisions, correct? If you can't drive that, then I mean, you question the very need for the analytics function as a whole, right? So I've always been an exponent of saying, look, it doesn't matter what kind of decisions are we going to make basis whatever analysis we do. And as part of that is to say, why we might build all kinds of sophisticated models. You have to understand that decision makers, you have to be able to present them that result of that analysis, not necessarily the process, but the result of that analysis in a very precise, concise, and consumable format, which will go back and say, hey, if I do this, this is likely to happen. Is this a good decision or a bad decision? Correct? I think so. To me, that's the crux of the problem, right? I mean, let's face it, it's the equivalent of if a tree fell in the forest and nobody heard it fall, did it really fall? So you might have the greatest analysis, but if good decisions are not being made basis that analysis, then really what is the point of doing that analysis? So I think that's where the visual ability to communicate and communicate visually to decision makers is a very critical part of analytics. In fact, that's it. My pet peeve, if you want to call it that, is that a lot of people that talk about analytics, or people that teach analytics, they don't emphasize this component enough. And people who have been analysts will tell you how long, the number of times analysts have come out to me after a long meeting with senior management, and then come back and say, oh, we had this great model, we had this great analysis, but somewhere the whole discussion got derailed into something else, and people didn't really understand the core of what it is, and we ended up wasting time discussing some trivial aspects which were not core to the analysis that was presented. Happens all the time in corporate, right? And part of that is, it's not that the management is sitting there saying, look, let's have chai, samosa, pakoda, and let's just while time away. They are there for a reason. They want to understand the issue. They want to understand the solutions. They want to take decisions. But somewhere there, the analyst has to take responsibility to communicate that effectively. And I think that's where visualization comes in a very critical way. Right? So I think I cannot emphasize the importance of visualization enough. Right?
Correct.
So in fact, I'm very happy, Rahul, that you're touching upon this as part of the course, because I'm not seeing this emphasized enough in most of the courses that talk about analytics, because they want to quickly jump into statistical modeling, regression models, and more importantly, somewhere, it's almost seems to be how quickly can you get to AI and ML. So I think emphasizing the fundamentals is so critical. Lovely to see that.
Thank you. And not only for the corporate managers, right? I mean, I think psychologically also human beings are tuned to see pictures better than words, right?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, right. Yeah, in fact, that's the thing, right. I mean, this is well known, right. Vision is the most powerful sense that we have there, right. In fact, I think there have been studies that talk about cognitive studies, right. 70% of the information we consume is visual, right. Auditory, sensory, touch, etc. So, I mean, people can sit and debate the 70%, 30%, like I always say, right, 85% of statistics are made up on the fly, right? But that being said, but I think it's beyond debate that vision happens to be the most powerful sensory perception that we have there. So, which is why the visual communication is so important. Right, and that's what we'll talk about as we talk through some of these things.
Perfect. And doesn't really matter what kind of data do you have. Data can be numerical, data can be continuous, it can be discrete, and we have visualization tools, right? We have visualization tools for each data type. Really, there is no dearth of visualization techniques.
Yeah, so interesting that your choice of words, Rahul. I mean, I would emphasize the techniques more than the tools, right? I think people, once you understand the techniques, you understand the fundamentals. The tool is just a medium, right? So when you say visualization tool, maybe perspective, I'm thinking of software tools that help you do visualization. That's not the issue.
Correct.
So I would emphasize techniques more than tools, because really what we want to teach people are the techniques. Then the tool just becomes a means of implementing that technique.
Correct. That's what we wish to discuss in the session today. I mean, essentially, what are the core principles on which the visualization should be based, irrespective of what data do you have that you want to represent.
And you know what? The other thing is, I think people need to understand these kind of categorical, numerical, discrete, continuous data, because the very nature of the data, right, dictates how you represent them visually. Right?
Correct.
The number of times I've seen people show me, trending data using categorical data, right? So that's the whole point, right? If you're going to show me, say, a line chart, which makes sense for a, time continuous trending kind of a data, but then you decide to draw a line chart on categorical data. Somewhere there, when you say, okay, between this point and this point, you've drawn a line connecting these 2 points. What's exactly between these two?
Correct.
Right? So, and these kinds of things. The amazing thing is, when you actually talk about it, everybody will smile and say, "Yeah, come on." I mean, like, obvious, isn't that so obvious? The scary part or the funny part, depending on your point of view, is the fact that it happens so frequently, right? So I think it's just that, part of it is tools. That's the reason why I emphasize the difference between tools and techniques, because what happens is you pull up the data, you go to Excel or something, and then draw, click, and say create chart. It's a dumb tool, right? It just does what.
Yeah.
So, spending that little bit of time, and hopefully the points we consider today when we discuss will get people to think for 2 seconds before creating a chart, right? And the 2 seconds will save you 2 hours of debate time when you're presenting your results.
Precisely. Yeah. So, what do you think are the general benefits of visualizing or visual representation of the data?
Benefits. The whole idea is communication, right? I mean, there's only one reason why. Look, if you think about it, business has to improve. So we do analysis, etc., to help the business improve. And we need to communicate that to the stakeholders so that right decisions can be made. Very simple. That's our objective as analysts, is to communicate that idea.
Precisely.
Correct? So visualization is our language of, so I could almost call visualization the language of the analyst, because let's face it, you go sit in a boardroom, they're not going to be interested in looking at your Python code.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So visualization is the language of analysts that when they talk to the business stakeholders, right? Now, and by the way, interestingly, visualization is also the language by which the analyst understands the real world, because the right visual representation can actually give you a very good view of what could be the core problem, and then actually put you on the right path to solving the problem. Right?
Yeah.
If you don't have a good visual representation, the problem itself may not necessarily be evident. Correct? So, so when you say it's visual, the stuff you talk about cognitive processes here, yes, that is what communication is. It's visual representation, visual communication. And obviously communication is to make the cognitive process easier. So part of what we do visualization is to say, look, the other person has to understand the concept, and we have to make it easier for them to understand the concept, not harder. Right? There are times when the visual representation itself is so complicated that people spend more time understanding the visual than what it is trying to communicate. Correct?
Yeah.
So I call that the equivalent of going to a foreign country and saying, where is the washroom? And the person gives you an answer, right? You spend more time trying to understand what the person was saying rather than where the washroom is. It might be just easier for the person to point. Right?
Yeah.
So having the wrong visualization is the equivalent of getting a very simple answer in a completely foreign language. Right? So you spend more time understanding what the person was saying, and rather than saying, okay, look, I asked you for the washroom, you pointed me there, problem solved, just say thank you and go.
Correct. And I have experienced this also. So many times we take up a consulting assignment, and at the end of the assignment, you are supposed to make a presentation to the senior management. And gently the person comes to you before the meeting and says, boss, don't present your math and don't present your code. Tell us what it means to us, right? So unless we talk the language that people understand so that they can take better decisions, our model and our code is useless.
Absolutely right. And see, some of it, which is kind of straying away from the core concept of what we're talking about here. I think as engineers, right, we also fall into the trap of confusing effort for importance, right?
Yes.
So, you might have spent 50% of your time, right, cleaning up the data and lining up the data correctly, and maybe only 30% actually building the model, or say, let's say 60, 70, 30, 70%, and typical 70% you will spend, just cleaning up the data, understanding this. That doesn't mean, that your process of cleaning up the data has to consume 70% of the time of your final presentation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we do fall into the trap of mistaking effort for importance, right? So it does happen. So that's part of the visualization, is to say, look, but I think that's slightly outside the scope of what we are trying to discuss here. But also be cognizant of that. So I think when we talk about this, we will talk about what is the purpose of this presentation. So maybe some of those things will be touched upon as we go through.
Correct. So essentially, by visualization, we mean visually highlighting few things. For example, through the form, or through color, or through spatial representations, right?
Yeah. So see, when you try to build a visual representation, right, and these are all, if you really think about it, all charts that you do, use one of these techniques and these are the things that the human eye spots very easily. Correct? So for instance, right, if you look at it, we are trained very easily to kind of get a sense of identifying the shortest bar in those 4 lines, right? I don't have to tell you that, look, bar 2 is shorter, right? Yeah. I just by looking at it, I know. Correct? Amazing thing is, we are also very good at very quickly evaluating by how much it is shorter. I mean, somebody will look at this and say, I would say it's about 15% shorter, right? It may be 15, 18, 14.25, but bottom line is without saying anything, I look at it, I get a very good idea, right? Similarly, the width, right? I mean, when you highlight it, when you use bold text versus a normal text, again, we pick up on that very, very quickly, right? Of course, orientation, size, shape, and obviously using enclosure to highlight, which is, when you draw a bar person. So these are all attributes of visual perception. And the whole idea is when you communicate, you have to think about which of these can I use to draw the user's attention to the important part. How do you get them to focus on what is important? And how do you get them to not focus on what is not important? Correct?
Yeah.
Like they say, right? What you say is as important as what you don't show, or what you show is as important as what you don't show. Correct? I would have made a crack about beachwear, but maybe not appropriate for the current audience. So we leave that aside.
Yeah. Okay. Now let us get down to the core of what we are trying to say. Right. You have often spoken about the 4 important kind of umbrella principles of visualization. Can you elaborate on that?
Right. So, something that I've been, honestly speaking, unfortunately, I would like to know, if I could, I would go back and say, where did I get this idea from? At the risk of saying, it was plagiarized, I was inspired, right? At some point, I might have seen this somewhere, but it resonated. So I've kind of made it a cornerstone of a lot of times when I talk to people in terms of this. So if there is somebody out there who actually came up with these things, consider credit duly granted, right? So the 4 things I always talk about is when you present a chart, when you build this one, these are 4 things that you have to absolutely follow. And in fact, write it down, go through a checklist. First is know the purpose. What is the purpose of putting this visual representation together, right? It has to have a purpose. It is, and the purpose cannot be, let me demonstrate my mastery of the charting tool. Correct? So the purpose is, why does this graph have to be here? Or why does this chart have to be here? Or why does this representation have to be here? I'm going to use the word graph, chart, and visual representation interchangeably, but sometimes in cases there could be different. Once you have a purpose, correct? That purpose will automatically determine what should be the form of the representation that you do. Correct? And as we go through, we'll talk about this. Second thing I always ensure is the integrity of what you present, right? And typically you will have errors of omission and commission when you're presenting data, right? To me, that's a non-negotiable, right? Integrity of the data, because even if whether it is by omission or commission, even if there is a small error in the data, correct? It will, and that could be in the most trivial, sidebar of this one, but it will derail the entire analysis. And essentially, even if it was, it was actually something I made a typo when I put it into this presentation, correct? Once it gets caught, the integrity of the entire presentation will be questioned. So integrity is absolutely critical, and it's a non-negotiable, correct? And I always talk about maximizing data ink and minimizing non-data ink, which is the equivalent of saying, spend ink on the items that you want to show. Don't spend ink on the items that which is not critical to the thought process. And then, so maybe just move on. We'll show your data and annotate is self-explanatory. So let's go hand in hand with the integrity of it as well, right?
True. So let's take this one by one. So let us understand what do we mean by purpose, right? So by purpose, we mean the actual, what is the business problem that we are trying to solve, right?
So no, not really necessarily, Rahul. So Because see, if I build a chart or a visual, right, it is a one step in the larger question that I'm trying to answer. Correct? So which means that this, because it's, let's face it, right, the business problem I'm trying to solve is not going to be solved by one visual representation. Right?
Yeah.
I might be going through a slide and a series of slides. This one, the purpose, when I put a representative graphic together, the purpose of that should say, this is going to make my ability to communicate this more complicated concept or this more is that much easier. It sets the stage in some cases, or this might say it emphasizes this. Correct?
Okay. Okay.
Look, another way to do it is, if you look at even this particular graphic that we are seeing on the screen, correct? Because I always talk about the umbrella principles, right? What do I mean by umbrella principles? In plain English, it covers everything. Correct?
Yeah.
And if you look at that little handle that I've shown there, correct? If I go back and say, what is the purpose of having that handle? It emphasizes the concept of the umbrella principle.
Yeah.
Correct? So it is there for a reason. Correct? So which means literally everything that there has to be a reason. So if you look at it and say, why is this there? What is the purpose of having that particular graphic on the screen? You should have a clear purpose. Correct? Now, the purpose, again, the reason I say a purpose is not necessarily the message. What you're talking about, how do you communicate the message? Right? The message could be communicated over a series of visual representations. Correct? And each of those have a purpose that contributes towards communicating that message.
Okay.
Right? So,
understood.
And in fact, when people are starting off, I always encourage them to, whenever you put this together, right? What is the purpose? Does it serve a purpose? If it doesn't serve a purpose, remove it. Sometimes, and there's one thing to say, it doesn't serve a purpose, remove it. Sometimes certain visual objects will actually have a counter purpose. Correct?
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful and focus on what you want to say. Correct? So I always encourage, when you're putting slides, think through and say, what is the purpose of having this visual representation, this slide, this graphic, whatever it may be, right? But just have in fact, I used to tell people to write it down, right? Saying, what is the purpose? Right?
So, nice. Correct. I understand the difference between the message that we want to convey and the purpose for which this visual tool is being used. Understand?
Exactly. Right.
Second thing was integrity.
Yeah. And this I see all too often, right? It's pretty evident here. So for instance, right, I mean, just to give an example, you should not be presenting in a way to distort the truth. Right? So if you look at the graphic on the right, that shows you, let's say, typically earnings per share, this one. Now, here's the beauty of it, right? When you look at the graph on the left and the graph on the right, without paying attention, the first thing that one would say is that, oh my God, when I see the graph on the left, it is so volatile.
Yeah.
Right? In reality, it's not. Correct? I mean, look, if somebody pulls out a calculator and says, okay, 164, 220, what is the percentage? But remember the thing I emphasize about how visually we see length, and we are very quick to measure relative length. Correct?
Yeah.
So when I look at the 1999 versus 2000, right, on the left graph, one would say we grew 6x or 5x.
Yeah, almost. Yeah. Correct.
Right? That was not the reality, right? Because what somebody has done is, you can see the axis has been cut off.
Correct. Yeah.
Now, and in fact, when I say this, right, somebody will come back and say, no, I want to emphasize the variability. Correct? Now, and that is where I say it is being, the integrity is lost. Because the reality is the variability is minuscule.
Correct. Yeah. We are exaggerating on the left-hand side. Yeah.
So by chopping it off, so a lot of people say, no, I want to emphasize the difference or the variability. I said, in the grand scheme of things, the variability is nothing. So they'll say, I want to show that North is so much better than South, or sales in East is so much bigger. But in reality, the per capita might be off by 0.5%. But by chopping it off, I'll make it appear as though it's off by 30-40%. Correct? And this is, you will be amazed at how frequently this is used, especially in media.
Exactly. I was going to say that. Yes.
Okay. And their equivalent of caveat emptor is they will have a small little wiggly thing at the bottom to show that access has been cut.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And and when I see this graph, that's the first thing I notice, right? The small wiggly line, squiggly line at the bottom.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is very common in media, right? And when you look at it, then and amazingly enough, when you look at it from the lens of the integrity is being on, you actually will understand the bias of the storyteller in terms of what they're trying to say here.
Yeah.
Right? That will become very, very evident. Right? So to me, how do you eliminate, as a storyteller, as a media person, I need to be making a statement of fact. Correct? By chopping it off, you are not stating fact. Right?
Correct.
So to me, integrity is so critical. Right? And I chose the word, the graph on the left is deceitful. It's a very strong word, and I chose it deliberately because I believe it is deceitful. It is communicating a wrong picture.
Precisely. Yeah. But the sad reality is exactly what you said. You see this every day in print media, in the news media, in the electronic media. You see this every day.
Yes, and the most common technique used, right? So again, as analytics professionals, correct? And when we are presenting analysis, it's our responsibility to make sure these kinds of things don't happen.
Precisely. Right? Yeah. Okay, moving on to the third thing about maximizing what we wish to highlight on the data ink.
Yeah. So again, right, very simple. I'm a big believer in simplicity, right? So I've used this as an example. If you think about it, right, all the grid lines, the yellow colors are all what I call non-data ink, correct? It doesn't communicate one iota of additional information for me, correct? Whereas the title that I put there, call totals by speciality, correct? That actually communicates something to me.
Yes.
Right? So to me, that is data ink. It's communicating something to me, correct? The numbers are communicating something to me, right? So any amount of ink that you use to communicate something is useful, correct? Anything else is styling. Now, styling, there are times when it's not about, there should be no styling. Understand this. Even the table that I have on the right, there is some amount of styling that is being done. Correct? But even that styling is also very specific for a purpose. Again, going back to purpose. So if you go back and say, what is the purpose of putting those cells in yellow background?
Yeah, there is nothing.
Then, so again, it ties back to the same thing. Right? What is the purpose of so if I go back and say, what is the purpose of the title? It has a very clear purpose. It tells me what this means is. Correct? So again, going back, see, and also if you look at it, that's the difference between purpose and message.
Yeah, correct.
So the purpose is, it tells me that it is caused by specialty. The message might be that PCP and PT dermatology is the highest.
Yeah, correct.
So the difference between a purpose and a message. So anything that you do, any color ink that you use that does not serve a purpose and communicate information to the end user is non-data ink, right? And again, you cannot eliminate it. So one would call the lines that we have, the horizontal and the vertical line, to be non-data ink, right? So that's why I said minimize your non-data ink and maximize your data ink. And you cannot eliminate it.
Correct. And the last point about annotating the data is essentially to help the users. Is that correct?
Yes. So again, right, very simple. Just look at the two graphs. What the left graph does is it gives you a axis, and then somebody has got to hold a finger or a ruler across this to read off what those bars are.
Yeah.
It's simpler to get rid of the axis tick marks, but annotate the data. Now it's much more just visually just looks so much more easier to read.
Correct. So much more easier on the right hand side. Yes. Yes.
So, annotating the data, right? Now, and people will see this as the graphs get more and more crowded and you have more and more data points. Annotation tends to become a bit sticky because it starts looking very messy, right? So fair enough, right? So again, you go back and annotate critical points. You don't have to annotate every single data point. Correct? Things like that. So, let's say you have 300 points on the x-axis, and then can you imagine a graph which has 300 little labels like that? It just becomes noise.
Too cluttery. Yes.
Right? So annotation, try to it's important, but be judicious and selective on the annotation.
Precisely. I mean, simply because it is listed as one of the important principles, don't blindly use it. Has been our consistent message. Yes,
correct.
Okay.
Right? So these are 4 principles, and my submission is that if you follow these principles, right, let's put it this way, you will not be wrong in what you're presenting, right? So I would say this as a, how shall I put it, a necessary but not sufficient condition for optimal representation of data.
Correct.
Right? So in words that will appeal to the audience of this class, right? These principles are necessary but not sufficient.
Correct. Right. Now let us focus on the process of designing the visualization techniques and tools, right? So you have a 3-step process. First of all, trying to understand the message, then choosing a particular form, and then designing that particular tool, right?
Right. So again, this here also, when you say define the message, what are you trying to communicate, right? And again, there's a purpose. What is the purpose of this thing? So if you are looking at it as a single visual component, right, or a sub-element of a graph, then you can think in terms of a purpose, or it could be, or what is the message I'm trying to communicate with this chart, correct? So there's a bit of a back and forth between a message and a purpose, the distinction I made, but the concept is the same, right? What is the message, right? And how do I ensure that when the person sees the graph, he or she gets the same message that I'm trying to communicate?
Right? That is very important.
Fundamentally, that's the key, right? What is being transmitted has to be received, it has to be what is received, right?
No loss in translation, yes.
No loss in translation, checksum should be there, correct?
Yes.
And that's fun, and that's the key, right? So if I'm trying to say something and somebody, because you are not always going to be standing around trying to in an ability to explain that graph. Somebody is going to pull up that graph or chart or whatever it is without the benefit of you standing next to them. Correct? Which means that it's your responsibility to ensure that anybody or random, let's say somebody has printed that and you see that graph when you buy peanuts on the beach, on the paper that is wrapped. When you open it up, you should be able to understand what the graph is.
Exactly.
So that's important, right? What am I trying to communicate? And how do I make that message clear and at a glance? See, you cannot come back and say, listen, if you spend 25 minutes looking through the graph and looking at the axis and this and that and this, and you will also get the same message.
You shouldn't have to use the magnifying glass to decipher the message.
Exactly. Correct. So no fine print, right?
Yes.
Then I always talk about sometimes the best way to communicate it is just write a paragraph. Right? If that is the best way to get the message across, please do so. There is nothing that says that you have to show it graphically. Correct? Or sometimes, I use diagrams like a flow diagram or a workflow diagram, and this is especially in factory, you will always draw how material flows, and or sometimes it be a graph, sometimes it will be a tabular display. So you have to choose the form of the visual display that is best aligned to the message you're trying to communicate.
That linkage is important.
You have a message, and what is the visual representative form that unambiguously conveys the same message that I want to convey.
Yeah.
That's critical, correct? And then there is a set of design principles, correct? And these design principles come into play to ensure that visual cognition, correct, is easy. Right?
Yes.
Don't confuse it. And I will spend a lot of time on that as well, because I think that's where people also go terribly wrong at times. The choosing the right form, in my opinion, is actually much easier, because once you get a clear message, the form almost suggests itself.
Yeah.
But the design principle is what makes a difference, correct? So when I say that, right, I mean, even this, I'm just trying to draw a parallel to see what people might understand. I would go to the equivalent of, in cricket, if you get a half volley outside the off stump, right? The shot that you play is natural. I mean, you don't try to hook that ball, right?
Correct.
You drive it through the covers, or you drive it through the offside, because it's a nice half volley outside the off stump.
Yeah.
So often not, once you get the message, the form suggests itself naturally, correct?
Yes.
Unless you are MS Dhoni, you don't try to helicopter shot the ball over mid-wicket, correct? If the ball is outside the off stump, you will hit it through the off stump, through the offside, by and large. It suggests itself, right? So that which is what I've been saying, when you get the right message, the form kind of suggests itself. But the design principles makes a difference, right? And that is the difference between Rahul Marathe or Anand driving the ball through the covers and Virat Kohli driving the ball through the covers.
Precisely, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's where the design principles come, right? People will pay money to see Virat Kohli do this, and you and I, Rahul, I don't think people will watch it even if we pay money to do it.
Exactly.
Right? So
very apt, yes.
Right. So I think that's where the difference comes in, correct? So we'll just go through a few of those things.
Exactly. So let us focus on these three things a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we have a few examples that we'll talk about that, right?
Precisely. Yes. This is where we can actually end this session and move on to the next session.